Welcome to today's Explainer. We're jumping right into a truly fascinating case study in sports business and governance. We're going to explore how importing an American franchise model into the English Premier League accidentally destabilized one of the most successful sports empires in history. We're talking, of course, about Manchester United and the massive structural friction caused by blending two fundamentally different sporting cultures.
Okay, let's kick things off with a pretty wild contrast. How in the world does a global sports giant go from absolute undeniable dominance to a sudden, prolonged drought almost overnight? I mean, during the Sir Alex Ferguson era, from 1993 to 2013, Manchester United secured 13 Premier League titles. They had an incredible 62% title success rate and won roughly 70% of their matches. But then, if we look at the post-2013 era, it's a totally different story. 0 Premier League titles in over a decade, and a win rate dropping to around 55%. To solve the mystery of this statistical cliff, we actually have to look far beyond the pitch.
Section 1. Two competing sports models. To truly wrap our heads around what happened, we first have to understand the core friction between these two very different worlds of sports governance.
The philosophical divide here is just massive. In the North American franchise model, you've got a closed league. Participation is completely guaranteed, which naturally mitigates financial risk and heavily protects the franchise's value. Leagues even engineer competitive parity through things like drafts and salary caps. Now, contrast that with the English Premier League, which operates on an open, merit-based pyramid. In this system, your status is entirely dependent on sporting performance. If you fail, you face the absolutely devastating financial and competitive reality of relegation. There are 0 safety nets.
You see, the North American model didn't just appear out of nowhere. It was methodically built over decades. Starting with territorial rights in the 1870s, it gained crucial antitrust exemptions by 1922, and eventually started collectively pooling TV rights through the Sports Broadcasting Act of 1961. So it's a system deliberately designed to be a centralized, almost cartel-like structure. The ultimate goal? Coordinated market stability, total predictability, and commercial scale. It's a machine built to protect the owner's investments at all costs. Section 2. The leveraged buyout. So, what happens when you bring that heavily protected American ownership mentality into the hyper-competitive, high-risk English football pyramid? Well, the catalyst that violently smashed these two sporting philosophies together was the 2005 acquisition of Manchester United by the American Glazer family. £790 million. That is a staggering number, and the sheer scale of this acquisition fundamentally changed the club's financial DNA. Prior to this, Manchester United was famously debt-free. They generated more than enough cash to continuously reinvest in their stadium, their training grounds, and their world-class players. But this monumental transaction completely rewrote their operational rulebook.
The real kicker here is how they bought it. They executed a leveraged buyout. Now, an LBO is an acquisition funded primarily by borrowed money, but the key detail is that the acquired company's own assets and cash flows are used as collateral to service the massive debt. It's a super common tactic in corporate America, sure, but it was largely unprecedented at this scale in English football. Effectively, the new owners made Manchester United pay for its own takeover. Crazy, right?
When you actually break down that £790 million price tag, it's pretty revealing. The Glazer family only put in around £275 million of their own equity. The rest, nearly £550 million, consisted of massive senior bank loans and something called payment in kind, or PIKE loans. And get this, those PIKE loans were rolling up at a punishing interest rate of 14.25%. In an instant, the club went from entirely debt-free to carrying an annual interest burden in the tens of millions.
Section 3. Masking the structural decay. Now, when a financial shock of that magnitude hits a sports team, you'd probably expect immediate consequences on the field.
But they didn't happen right away. Incredibly, the immediate effects were almost entirely masked by the pure genius of their manager, Sir Alex Ferguson. Between 2005 and 2013, Manchester United actually won 5 Premier League titles and a Champions League. Despite operating under a heavily leveraged structure that was constantly squeezing their resources, Ferguson's unparalleled managerial stability maintained elite on-pitch performance. He was, effectively, hiding the structural rot that was beginning to set in behind the scenes.
But the financial time bomb was ticking away. Over 1 billion pounds. Let that number just sink in for a second. Over 1 billion pounds that should have been used to future-proof the club, to buy the absolute best young talent, to upgrade the stadium was instead drained. It was literally pulled right out of the club's revenues to service the massive interest payments, the underlying debt, and eventually regular shareholder dividends.
And all that financial drain quickly compounded into a genuine infrastructure crisis. Old Trafford, which was once the undisputed crown jewel of English stadiums, saw minimal investment and began visibly decaying. Their famous Carrington training ground fell behind rivals. And perhaps most damaging of all, their player recruitment became totally reactive. Without a massive budget for pure football talent, their transfer strategy increasingly prioritized players with large global brands to drive commercial reach, rather than actually building a cohesive, data-driven football team. They were incredibly slow to adopt the modern sporting analytics that clubs like Manchester City and Liverpool were aggressively pursuing.
It basically boils down to this. The imported American management mindset fundamentally struggled to adapt. The American model assumes stability. It prioritizes profit and enterprise value because the closed league system protects against failure. But this actively conflicts with the hyper-competitive, meritocratic nature of English football. In the Premier League, you absolutely have to prioritize constant sporting investment because standing still means you risk sliding down the pyramid and losing your revenue streams entirely.
Section 4. Fans versus customers. This massive shift in priorities didn't just hurt the balance sheet or the training facilities. It completely fractured the club's relationship with its community.
There's just a huge, fundamental difference in how these two models view the people in the seats. In the American model, fans are often treated as customers, consumers, engaged for entertainment, venue monetization, and a family-oriented spectacle. But the English model views fans as stakeholders. These are people with deep, multi-generational civic allegiances. Their local identity is entirely tied up in the club, and they expect a traditional voice in how their institution is run. The new ownership mistakenly treated these deeply embedded stakeholders like mere consumers, which led to a profound, really damaging cultural disconnect. And man, the fans fiercely rejected this commercial-first ideology. The backlash was intense and multi-layered. Some fans literally walked away and formed a breakaway team, FC United of Manchester, just to protect the soul of their civic institution. We saw the famous green and gold protests, with fans wearing the club's original colors to visually reject the current ownership. There were high-profile board resignations and sustained resistance against the club's new, slick corporate communications. The community felt like their heritage was being strip-mined to pay off Wall Street debts.
Section 5. The ultimate culture clash. Which brings us to the core takeaway of our explainer today.
The research points to one undeniable fact. You literally cannot drop a closed league mindset into an open pyramid reality without causing massive structural friction. The new management operated under the expectation that Manchester United's massive global commercial momentum would just persist, independent of what actually happened on the pitch. But that proved completely ill-suited to a meritocratic marketplace. By placing corporate metrics like EBITDA above relentless cutting-edge football innovation, the club lost its adaptive capacity. While they were busy optimizing their commercial synergies, rivals like Manchester City and Liverpool were pouring every single resource into creating high-performance, data-driven football machines, and they simply surged ahead.
As the business of sports continues to hyper-globalize at breakneck speed, with more cross-cultural ownerships happening every year, the decline of Manchester United's dominance leaves us pondering a really critical question. Can a modern sports empire truly balance global corporate profit with local community soul? Or does the relentless pursuit of financial engineering inevitably erode the very competitive spirit that made the team valuable in the first place? It's a remarkably complex balance, and one that the sports world is clearly still struggling to perfect. Thanks for joining me for this explainer. I hope it gave you a whole new perspective on the business behind the beautiful game.